Call the January 28, 2019 regular meeting of Peters Township Council to order. Mr. Lauer, can you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Merrill?
Present.
Mr. Steigel? Mr. Curry? Here. Mr. Coakley?
Here.
Mr. Berquist?
Here.
Mr. Ball? Present. Mr. Lewis?
Here.
I ask that you all join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the regular council meeting of January 7th, 2019.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next is special reports, of which there are none this evening. Now we come to the part of the meeting which is audience comments. Any member of the audience who wishes to speak on a non-agenda item can now speak for a period of up to 5 minutes. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on a non-agenda item? Just come forward, sir. Please state your name and your address, please, sir.
Name's Tim Croft. I live in 112 Conestoga Drive in Bishop, PA. It's in the old trails. I've been having a problem with a neighbor's tree, a box elder tree that produces these box elder bugs. And I get thousands. Pardon me?
What did you say?
It's called. I have a neighbor that has a box elder tree that produces these box elder bugs. I get thousands and thousands of them on my house. And there's an ordinance against it. And 2.5 years ago, I met with Ed, and he had the arborist come out. The arborist looked at it, said, yes, I'm infested. He said, cut it down. It's 2.5 years later. I'm still being infested. The tree still stands. So I need some help in trying to get this resolved.
Ed?
No, it's a quick synopsis.
Well, I can go into detail. I'll give you as much detail as you want.
You got 5 minutes.
Bottom line, the township has been involved with this for over 2 years, and we tried to resolve it and could not resolve it. The neighbor that has the tree is not willing to cut it down, and it's not crystal clear that it is infested. And the last time we met out in the field, we kind of left it between the neighbors to work it out, and he's been told that.
No, I've not been told that. I'm going to push back on that. I was never told that.
I sent you an email to that effect.
You sent me an email. Okay. I started getting infested this past October. And previous to that, I would send an email to Ed. The arborist would come out 2 times previous, look at my house and say, yes, you're infested. So I started getting infested. I sent Ed an email saying I'm being infested. I didn't hear anything for 2 or 3 weeks, so I called him, or I emailed him and says, what's going on? He says, I told you at the last meeting at your property that I'm no longer involved. And I was shocked. I went to my wife, who was at the meeting. I said, do you remember him saying this? And she goes, no, I don't know what he's talking about.
How many of these box elders are we talking about, sir?
Well, initially the ordinance was within 100 feet of my house, and there was 2 box elders. One was more than half dead, which was cut down. The other box elder, which was 2 foot diameter, 60, 70 foot tall, right on the property line, was with the original ordinance. The new ordinance has no 100-foot limitation to it. So when the arborist looked at it 2.5 years ago, he said, cut both trees down that were within 100 feet. But he says, you may be infested with the other ones. He couldn't tell for sure.
Now, was this Mr. Jarish who looked at it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, this is where I get to call on my expertise from raising trees when I was younger. I know, in fact, that box elders are considered to be a weed, and I know there are a lot of municipalities in this country that have actually banned the planting of box elders because of this very reason, that they cause these bugs. And it's amazing. I guess the tree, from what I understand, the trees rot quickly, and the bugs actually will infest the tree, and they come out like in tens of thousands all at the same time. And I guess they're attracted to heat, so they tend to attach themselves to bricks and the side of a house, looking for like the sunny side, the warmth. And,
you do know this.
I do know this. Yeah. I was reading those tree books when I was bored in middle school. Actually, who thought it would pay off?
All right, here you go.
So here we go.
And a pest control company can't spray them?
That's what I was saying.
Well, pest control, the options they had originally was cut the tree down, hire your own arborist, to make his own opinion if he disagreed with the township arborist, which you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that disagreed with the township arborist. Because I had worked on my yard last year, and an arborist came up to me, and I'm telling him what I need done, pruned in the front yard. He goes, you know, you got a box elder tree in your backyard. I go, no, it's not my tree. And this is a quote: they're a piece of junk. Now, arborists tend to want to plant trees, heal trees, keep them alive. And I started explaining what's going on. He's just shaking his head. He says, who would spray a box elder tree? But they were given the option to spray the tree by a professional in the spring. It had to be done, or else cut the tree down. To date, that tree has not been sprayed professionally.
Have you talked to your neighbor about this?
You can't talk to my neighbor. I tried to talk to my neighbor, okay? And that's why I came to the township. 2.5 years the township has been talking to my neighbor. Can't get the issue resolved.
Which
And that's why I'm
address
here.
again?
Pardon me?
What is your address again?
112 Conestoga Drive.
Well, and as I recall, these bugs, too, they leave excrement, right? They probably
They leave
stain your
excrement.
siding and stain the side.
According to the wall, which I didn't realize, they can cause an asthmatic reaction to certain people. He leveled the tree as a nasty tree. And these are arborists.
Okay.
Let me do this. Let me review what we've received from Mr. DeRoche, and let me compare that to what we have the authority to do with under our ordinance, and I will get back to council and let you know what we're
Okay.
going to do.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll look into it.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure. Time's up, though. Go ahead.
My neighbors sent a invoice to the township saying that they professionally sprayed the tree, but it was a fake invoice. Okay. Originally, I was told I could have that invoice when I first looked at it in Ed's office, and I read the invoice, and it had something written on it that made me believe that the tree was sprayed professionally by Terminex. Since then, the same arborist told me that this tree, if they sprayed that tree, I should have been told, because they would have had to come on my property. So I asked Ed who sprayed it. Terminex. I called Terminex. Terminex is not licensed to spray a tree. And now I can't get that invoice from Ed. Terminex wants it, and I want it.
Well, maybe if they would have sprayed it, it would have killed the tree.
Pardon me?
Maybe if Terminex would have sprayed it.
No, they're
it
not
would have killed the
licensed.
tree.
They're only allowed to spray
Maybe it would have
5 feet
killed
from the
tree.
house.
Okay.
Well, we'll look into it, sir. Thank you. Is there anyone else from the audience who wants to speak? Okay, let's move on to unfinished business, of which there is none. I'm sorry, there is. The appointment to the Peters Township Youth Commission.
So, council, there is a vacancy on the Youth Commission. Council had said that they were interested in appointing one of the individuals who had previously applied for that position. I've included in the docket their resumes, so.
Well, I'd like to move that we appoint Ty Cargeries to fill the vacancy on the Youth Commission.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Now we'll move on to new business. First item under new business is a consent agenda. Tonight's consent agenda includes 6 items. These are 6 items that can be approved in one action rather than filing separate motions. The purpose of the consent agenda is to move the routine matters along quickly so the council can focus on issues that are important and may require discussion. The 6 items on the consent agenda this evening include, number 1, resolution authorizing the purchase of a certificate of deposit at Dollar Bank. Number 2, resolution changing authorized signers on a certificate of deposit at Washington Financial. 3, resolution changing authorized signers on checking accounts at PNC Bank. 4, special permit for the Peters Township Farmers Market for May 22nd to September 25th on Wednesdays from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. 5, special permit for off-premises sign and banners for St. Benedict's. 6, authorize the appropriate township officials to execute a grant agreement between the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and Peters Township. Are there any members of council who wish to have any of the items from the consent agenda removed from the consent agenda for separate discussion?
I did have a question, though, on the St. Ben's. Is it the exact same terms as last year? The
Yes.
same thing with the farmer's market?
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item is acceptance of the 2018 Survey of Financial Condition.
The Municipalities Financial Recovery Act, Act 47, requires that each municipality complete and file with the Department of Community Economic Development a survey of financial condition that applies to the prior year, and the purpose of which is to determine whether our community may become distressed. Certainly that isn't the situation here. What is required that the council acknowledge receipt of that?
Need a motion?
Yes.
I'll make a motion that the township acknowledge receipt of the 2018 survey of financial condition.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item is exoneration of Ryan Jarosky and Jordan Tax Services from their obligations to collect 2018 Peters Township property tax.
Move they be exonerated.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
That should have actually been on the consent agenda. It's something we do every year.
7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item is award of a contract for various insurance coverages, including automobiles, fire, and liability for 2019 through 2022.
So one of the things that Peters Township does that's somewhat unique to this municipality is that every 3 years we go through a process of bidding out insurance coverages. Mari Murphy is here. She's the individual who has helped us through this process on a number of occasions. She would like the opportunity to review the report that's in your docket to explain how we got to where we are.
Hi, good evening. I'll just briefly go over the summary of the results here. If you have any questions as I'm speaking, please let me know. We did this report after we got a review of all the incoming insurance proposals, and specifications were created and sent out to all the insurance agents that were interested. We put an ad in the paper, and that's how we got the replies from the insurance agents so that we knew who to send the specifications to. Just so you can see the extent to which we covered the market, Exhibit A on page 4, is that in their packet?
Yes,
Okay.
it's on there.
That lists all the agents that were originally involved in the process and their market requests. So we had at the beginning 6 agents involved, and we pretty much covered the gamut in terms of the markets they approached for municipal business. We needed to make sure all the AM Best ratings were appropriate, and they were in some cases, excuse me, and in one case they were not. Once the proposals were received, I reviewed them for basic content, and I reviewed all the material coverage differences between the programs and compared them with your current coverage. So our goal was to provide you with a cost-effective program, one that meets the needs, and one that's complete. So we have some really good news with your insurance program. The values for the program increased in several areas. Your basic building and contents, inland marine, excuse me, and traffic signals went from 56 to 57 million roughly, in this, with the total increase of about $979,000. You also had additional new vehicles that I didn't even list in here that increased your values. And despite the increase in values, all the premiums dropped from the expiring, including the people that were competing for the new coverage. The expiring premium was $134,440, and renewal premiums came in between $126 and $129. These results, combined with some of the variety of insurance companies were approached and the ones that declined to quote due to the inability to compete with the pricing and the program that's being offered, I think is a clear indication of the excellent pricing and structure of your current program. Market responses. Below are the results of the marketing efforts, and there were a list of agents, which is on Exhibit A, page 4. Your incumbent agent, Campbell, covered the gamut pretty good, had gone to several different places. U.S. Specialty was one of them, and they got about a $200,000 indication. They went to Cincinnati. They were only willing to cover property, and they wouldn't be competitive. Zurich declined due to expiring pricing. One Beacon also gave us a high indication at 167, and the MRM program was at about 150, but that didn't include the public officials or the law enforcement. Then Travelers also provided a quote that was included in the premium summary, but due to the lower limits on the general liability, abuse and molestation, and the excess, we did not consider that a competitive proposal. The Gleason Agency also presented a complete proposal via McKee Risk. Alliant also gave us an indication, but that was at $175,000. DeLuca and DeZamba also offered something. Prima did not meet our AM Best rating, so they didn't quote. And Selective was at 112 before we even threw in the public officials, crime, flood, and quake. So that wasn't competitive. And Sco Long approached Penn Prime, but Penn Prime couldn't meet our due date. And Higbee approached Glatfelder, but they were unable to provide coverage for all the footbridges that are in all the parks throughout the township. And we have that coverage now, so that made that uncompetitive. So the premium results for the insurance company are found in Exhibit B on page 5. They really came in neck and neck. So you have an expiring policy at $134,440. Campbell's renewal with Argonaut came in at $127,433. They also went to Travelers, which we discussed, but that came in at $128,727. And then the Gleason proposal came in at $126,136. Now, the dam exposure is always a concern for Peters Township, and the Argonaut includes the downstream dam exposure, but we never include coverage for the dam itself. It's an earthen dam, and that's been typical over several renewal cycles. And the Argonaut umbrella also picks up the coverage for the downstream dam exposure. We picked up some coverage for the engineer under the general liability and public officials. And Gleason proposal provided coverage under the general liability for the engineer, but not under the public officials. So that was a decrease of coverage. And this was something you should be aware of. I don't know if you're using drones in the township. There's all sorts of restrictions on drones, okay? So if you get into any big drone usage, I can always talk to Paul about what the specific exclusions are, but you have a limitation of a $25,000 limit of liability on the use of drones. So that's new.
That's township use.
Yes, like if you had a drone, I guess, and you sent out to do something, survey land or...
And the township does own a drone, and it's used by the fire department, so we do need to discuss that.
Okay, we can go over.
The school district does also.
Okay, it's not new to the policy, but we should, yeah, we can go over the endorsement and see what the restrictions are. Okay. The umbrella limits, the Argonaut program has a very distinct coverage, which really makes it a super competitive program. If you go to Exhibit C on page 6, when you think of an umbrella coverage, what it does is it's basically like an umbrella over all the underlying coverages. So you have your primary coverages, and there's this coverage over top of it that applies in aggregate to all of the coverages underneath it. However, with the Argonaut program, they have this thing called a silo endorsement, so it gives you the $5 million on each individual line of coverage. So when you look at the chart, you can see the difference that it makes, because the first column is all shared, and the second column is specific to each line. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? So you're getting a lot more coverage is basically what happens. It's probably unlikely you'll ever use it all. We hope not, but it's there if you need it. So it's a lot of limits. So for that reason, and the pricing, which the pricing was close with the other program also, I'm recommending that you renew the program through Argonaut Insurance Company with Campbell for a renewal premium of $127,433.
Does any member of council have any questions for Mrs. Murphy?
That was very thorough. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Murphy.
I move that we approve the insurance coverage as proposed.
Second.
The motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item on the agenda is request from residents to accept Mallard Lane, a private street, into the township's highway system.
We have received a request from the Homeowners Association for the township to consider taking over ownership of Mallard Lane. The purpose of it on tonight's agenda is to find out from council whether that you would consider that request, and if so, what conditions you would place on on taking that street over. As council will recall, we've had a few other instances where there have been private streets and the township has taken them over. This one is less problematic than some of the ones that we've looked at in the past because its configuration is such that our maintenance of it would be no different than it would be of any other street. The reason why I believe it was originally developed as a private street as opposed to a public street was that if it in fact was a public street, there would have been difficulty achieving the setbacks given that what was required at the time was a 50-foot right-of-way. If we take it over, I think you'll end up with a right-of-way that will work, but it probably will not be 50 feet because to do that we would be creating all kind of non-conforming lots. But we have right-of-ways that we own that are as narrow as 33. We have within the ordinance now in certain sections of town we're actually taking 40-foot right-of-ways. And again, I think as a practical matter, because of the nature of this street, a narrow right-of-way does not create a problem for the township. So if you were to consider taking it over, what I'm suggesting is what we would require is what we've required from other private streets that were taken over, as well as what we require when we take over streets and developments. And that would be that there be an engineer's report submitted describing the condition of the storm sewer system, and that would have with it video evidence evidencing that condition. That if there were any repairs that needed to be made to either the street, which I don't believe there are any, or the storm sewer systems, that they would be complete before we take over the road. The Homeowners Association employed a surveyor and engineer to submit a revised site plan designating the location of the public right-of-way, the public easement, and the cartway, and that there be prepared a deed of dedication for the purpose of transferring the ownership of the public of the right-of-way to the township. So,
Do we know how wide the actual paved cartway is?
It's 24 feet.
yeah, so I can say I think it's a 24-foot. I think it's a standard road.
So the only real issue is the width of the right-of-way, then,
Yes.
not the paved cartway itself.
Right.
What would be the advantage for the township to take that over?
Well, there's no advantage ever to the township of taking over any street because what it brings with it is an obligation to maintain it. So, just like any other street that we take over when a development goes in, it creates an obligation. I mean, this obligation is no different than what we have anywhere else in the township.
But we still get the liquid fuels money, even if it's not.
You would get liquid fuels money on the street.
Do you have any idea how much?
Oh, it's inconsequential given its
Yeah, it
length.
would be.
Yeah, you're talking pennies.
In other circumstances, when we've taken over private roads, it seems to me that there's always been some compelling reason. Either there's an issue of pass-through or there's an issue of emergency.
No, if you look at all of these, and this is why when in our workshop last Monday, for the most part, private streets have been created for the purpose that to allow them to develop without being subject to our setbacks. And with one exception, we had a private community where the desire was that it be a gated community, that it not be required to interconnect. And so, but in all of these cases, what eventually happens is winter maintenance is such that people have a preference that we do this. And so, unlike in the case of Prestonwood, where we took over those private streets, and at some point in the future, we're going to have a very difficult time maintaining what we've taken over. That's not the case here. This will be no different than any other street in Peters Township because of the way it's configured.
I sort of recall that we stopped allowing private streets on new developments, or at least tried to.
Well, you can't
eliminate them.
You can't prohibit them, but what we're going to suggest is, and what the ordinance says right now is, and that's why this is 24 foot, is that you have to develop the road to township standards. What we're now going to do is to change the ordinance and say, you need to take this cartway and put it in a private right-of-way that is equivalent to what would be required by the underlying zoning. So there's no advantage given to people who want to develop on private streets.
It just seems that we encounter this all the time, where the developer figures out a way to get his development done. Everyone loves the private street aspect of it when they're buying the house, and then all of a sudden, when a couple of winters go by,
Winter comes.
and they're like, please take over our street.
Yes.
And it seems like they circumvent the process in doing so.
Well, the problem you have is it's always the people who buy there who you feel some sympathy for.
Absolutely.
And they're
Because
usually
you never realize it until you move in how much those common area expenses are eaten up by the street itself.
Was there disclosure in the HOA documents? I mean, normally they're written to explain what your requirements will be, your obligations
I don't
will
think
be.
so, but it would say it's a private road.
I think people would know it was a private street when they.
Isn't there a sign at both egresses that says it's a private drive? So that sign's going to come down if we were to...
Yeah. We see these in a number of municipalities, as Paul indicated. These are just really developers that get around the rules.
Exactly.
And then leave it to what these people probably tell you, they're tax-paying homeowners, that they're paying the same tax as everyone else and they want that particular service, putting aside for the moment that they bought on a private lane, or they maybe bought from somebody else who didn't appreciate what was going on. But normally it's the developer that's responsible for this kind of situation. And that's what we, obviously frown upon these, because we know this happens all the time. Give it 5 or 10 years, they're going to commit a petition and take the street over.
Except that with this piece of property, looking at it, had the developer attempted to comply with the requirements, he's not able to build that development,
Correct.
I would guess. That parcel is still
That's
open.
why they do it,
Could I ask whether or not accepting the street would create any obligation to maintain the tree buffer that runs along East McMurray?
No, all it would do is create an obligation to maintain the cartway as well as the storm source.
Those trees outside the right-of-way.
Yeah.
And the sidewalks are outside the right-of-way too, right?
I don't know that, because we would have to,
Which one you apply?
we would have to look at that as we work with the homeowners association to determine the
Well,
right
the
of way.
homeowners would be responsible for clearing the snow off of the sidewalk.
Well, I just want to make sure if it's within the right-of-way, and we accept it, then we're stuck.
Absolutely.
I don't know. This is always a tough one. I feel for the homeowners, but at the same time...
But as I said, you've got some homeowners here who may wish to speak to.
Anyone wishes to speak? Ms. Brooks?
Good evening, Council. Question, if I recall, prior to these homes being built, the developer had some problems with the soil. In effect, I believe that the soil was basically landfill material from the removal of the debris from the middle school when we had the mine subsidence problem. If I'm not mistaken, the developer removed some of the components of that landfill. But what I would be concerned about is soil stability. I don't know what was used to replace what was removed, and I don't know how stable that is. I would certainly be concerned about inheriting a potential pitfall, if I can use that term, when it comes down to maintenance of this road and its stable condition.
Thanks, Ms. Brooks.
Thank you.
Is that true, Mr. Susan?
When that was all done, that was done under the inspection of a geotechnical engineer and compacted. We have all those reports.
I thought it was in the back.
Mostly in the back.
It was most in the back corner.
Correct.
Well, when was this road put in?
That's been
I was going to say.
I'm not.
I'd say it's been close to a decade,
Top
right?
coat went on in 2015. I'm not sure when it was actually built though.
It's been a while.
Yeah, 08 maybe.
So
Yeah, the plan was recorded in 2008, so.
what are you looking from us? You don't
Well,
want a motion, right?
what we need is a motion, and here's the
A
thing.
motion to accept?
No, a motion to consider accepting based upon a set of conditions. The only thing that I would say to you is that if in fact, in fairness to the homeowners, if in fact they meet these conditions, it's going to come back to you, but I think they should be able to rely upon the fact that if they can meet these conditions, that in fact it'll get accepted. Because if there's, the idea tonight is to determine whether or not, whether under any condition council would be willing to accept it.
Well, I would very reluctantly consider it.
I'm willing to consider it only
Yeah.
again because I feel a certain amount of empathy for the property owners
That's the only.
because they're not the
but
ones that,
yeah.
of
And I'm
course.
telling you, any other
again,
development comes here and wants to do private streets. It's,
Well, like I said, we're going to change the incentive to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Come on. Please state your name and address, sir.
My name's Don Kalkbrenner. I live at 138 Mallard. And I can't speak for all the homeowners there, but I think, number one, it's already been stated, we're homeowners, tax-paying homeowners, and
I get that.
I can speak
the
for
idea, the idea is it was a private street.
well, I can speak for myself and tell you that maybe I was just naive or not very smart, but the fact that it was a private street had no impact on my decision to buy the home. And I think that most of the homeowners there would say that as well. It wasn't our decision to make it a private street.
I get that. That's the issue we're.
Yeah. So
And the only reason
I wanted to emphasize.
I would even consider it is for that reason.
Well, I
But
appreciate that.
At the end of the day, you know, they use that as a sales advantage too. You got a private street. You got a sign there that says
Was that
private street.
disclosed, though? Did they say that to you when you bought?
If they did, I didn't listen to that. I wasn't listening. So,
I get that.
okay.
When you assess the homeowners, I assume there's a HOA fee, right?
Yes.
Is there a component of that that goes into a reserve to replace the sewers and the roads and
Yes.
things like that?
Yes,
Okay.
among other things.
Just out of curiosity, how much does each homeowner have to pay every year to plow the snow and maintain the roadway? do you know?
Jay would probably.
We have $160.
Now you got to come forward. I'm sorry.
We have $160 a month HOA fee.
That's the total HOA fee.
Yeah, total HOA fee.
And that covers plowing
We have
the
a deal
snow.
that we pay the plowing company, I think, for 4 months, whether it snows or not.
Something like $1,500 a month
Yeah.
for a 4 or 5 month period.
Yeah.
Do they do landscaping too? Is that?
No, that's a different fee.
For the record, though, could you state your name and address?
John Fedorka, and I was the first one there, 114 Mallard Lane.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And we just put those signs up because we were getting a lot of traffic.
Really?
Yes, if Valley Brook Road, during rush hour, if it backed up, people would go through ours to try to get.
10 cars ahead.
Yeah, exactly,
5 cars ahead.
exactly.
I've seen that
So we
happen.
just put the.
I've seen it.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
That was the
Hard to
reason for the
believe, but I have
signs.
seen.
yeah.
So you have, if I could just explore another question. So you're telling me that you've been telling us that you paid $160 a month, and a portion of that has gone into a fund to maintain the sewers or improve them and maintain the roads.
Yeah, we have excess capital that we put it.
Yeah, I would say it isn't specific. It's a general
Yeah.
capital improvement reserve.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Did you want to say something?
Well, no, I'll just, John Heisey, 126 Mallard Lane, and as we've said, I'm probably one of only 2 or 3 resale, so a second owner in the plan. And I do believe when we bought the unit, reading through the homeowners, we were aware that it was a private street. I think the signs might have even have been up. We've been there for about a year and a half. But again, our point here is, when we met as a HOA, we all discussed this and discussed the pros and cons to us of doing it. But our purpose was to, present this originally, make the request, and ideally have it considered, but subject to the engineering study. And then that would be step 2. And then depending on the results of that, have it presented again. So.
Okay.
Like I said before, I certainly feel a certain amount of sympathy for these property owners. My concern, though, is looking at that map, if that sidewalk is in that right-of-way and we agree to accept it, not only are we on the hook for the sidewalk, but also a portion of those driveways, which are between the sidewalks and the cartway. So I would think before I'd feel comfortable doing anything, I'd want to know whether or not any portion of those driveways and those sidewalks are within the right-of-way. So I would make a motion tonight that we table this and allow the township to determine whether or not those sidewalks and those portions of the driveways are within that right-of-way.
Well, I can tell you that everybody's driveway
Yeah,
is
everybody's
in the right of way
driveway
to
goes
some
up there.
degree, so,
I think the sidewalks are.
and there's a lot of sidewalks in the right of way too.
Right, but are we being asked to accept the entire right-of-way or just the cartway?
Carway.
No, you're going to establish a right-of-way, and then we're going to accept the right-of-way. But there are sidewalks and right-of-ways where the obligation to maintain those is not with the township,
Right.
but with the property owner. But we are going to accept the right-of-way.
Sounds like
So
they're,
will we have to do the sidewalks? Snow removal.
I don't believe that you
Well,
will.
that could be
but
a
I won't bring it back to you with a recommendation that we take over sidewalks. That's
Okay.
not going to happen.
All right.
Wait, somebody has a question.
Does anyone second Frank's? I'll second it.
You're going to second the table. I don't think that's necessary.
Okay.
I don't think we need a motion.
No?
They already had a motion.
It was a motion to second.
All right.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just want to make it clear that if we're going to do this, I'm not going to commit that if it comes back that way, that I'm going to agree to that.
All right, so this motion is solely to table pending the township's review of...
We're just voting the table?
Right.
Oh,
Voting the
okay.
table pending
I
the
don't have a
township's
problem.
review of what... Well, let me modify the motion now based upon what Mark has said. Since I made the motion, I will modify the motion, and I will make a motion that we table this pending the township's review of what percentage of the sidewalks and the driveways are within the right-of-way area.
All right. I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Whoa.
Wait, who said nay?
We have a couple nays.
Okay. 4-3, Mr. Lauer.
Okay.
Gary?
Did you vote yea? Nay? Would you vote, Monica?
Roll call.
I said, you.
Oh, okay. I thought it was
Yeah, 4-3.
4-3. I thought it was 3-4.
Okay. Next is to award a contract under the CoStarz program for the purchase of playground equipment for Peterswood Park.
The 2019 budget includes an appropriation of $490,000 for the acquisition and installation of a playground and a picnic shelter at Peterswood Park. 50% of that funding is being provided by the state of Pennsylvania. If you'll recall,
Is it below budget?
yes, it is.
I'm going to make a motion that we award the contract under the CoStarz program for the purchase of playground equipment for Peterswood Park.
I'll second that. I have a question, though, Mr. Lauer. Is this the color we're going to go with? Because
Yeah, I thought we had to do the ADA color like we did.
No, the one down below is in an area that is intended for individuals with disabilities. This playground is on the top of the hill, and
All right. But it's not going to be blue at the bottom, right?
it's going to be red and white, I think, is what the intention is.
Okay, I'm just saying the picture in our docket is,
different than what you have there.
Yeah.
No, it's that.
That's color option 2.
Yeah.
I understood the board, the Parks and Rec board voted to try to be consistent, and the red was the color they were going, but that's why the amphitheater group.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's- yeah.
As I just wanted to know, because the last time when we approved the one for the lower yard, we had to use the ADA color.
Yeah, but you rejected the red turf that I asked for. So I remember that?
You haven't-
Oh, no.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next is award of a contract under the CoStarz program for the purchase of a truck.
And the following items related, which is the purchase of the truck body. There's an appropriation of $180,000 to acquire a new 40,000 VW dump truck What's being proposed is that we acquire the truck under the CoStarz program at a cost of $100,849, and that contract be issued to Kenworth of Pennsylvania. And then in addition, that the dump body at a cost of $78,065 be awarded to Walsh Equipment under the CoStarz program.
So it's 107.
It's my thought that I don't recall us buying a Kenworth before.
Last truck we bought was a Kenworth.
Was it?
Yes.
I knew that we made a transition, but I didn't think that that was the case.
That's real close.
So moved?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next is award of a contract under the CoStarz program for the purchase of a truck body.
No, we just did that.
No, we did both.
No, we did them both together.
Yes, they did them both
Okay, never
together.
mind. Next is appointment of an independent financial advisor for the purpose of issuing bonds.
Last fall, we advertised for proposals for independent financial advisor to assist the township with the issuance of bonds. There were 6 proposals that we received. The 2 firms that provided the most competitive pricing were actually 2 firms that we have worked with in the past, PFM Financial Advisors and J.D. Montgomery Scott. PFM, in all likelihood, what we are going to do is a competitive sale of our bonds. It makes sense because it's a new issue. PFM probably does more of those than anybody else in the state of Pennsylvania. The challenges with PFM is that they're located in Harrisburg, and where we have worked with them in the past, it becomes a little bit more difficult when we need them to provide us additional information. J.D. Montgomery Scott does competitive sales for the Mount Lebanon School District. That's principally where their experience is with that. The fact of the matter is all of these competitive sales are facilitated by a service offered by Grant Street investors. And so it's my opinion that having someone with a local representation in this particular case, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions about what it is we ought to be doing, makes sense. And it's for that reason I recommend that we accept J.D. Montgomery Scott's proposal.
Mr. Lauer, are the additional fees fixed, or is that a not-to-exceed number? Or?
I believe in the case of J.D. Montgomery Scott, that's going to be the fixed amount.
And did we actually budget an amount for this? I'm trying to recall if we had a...
Yes, there is.
So is this under what we budgeted?
That's a good question.
I believe it is. These fees are going to get incorporated inside of the bond issue anyhow, so it's not going to make any difference.
Well, it's still money we're spending.
Yes, I understand that.
Well, I'll move that we appoint an agreement with J.D. Montgomery Scott for independent financial advisor services for the issue of bonds.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
One abstention.
601, Mr. Lauer. Next is departure from regulations creating a residential lot with direct driveway access to a collector road.
Actually, item J.
Yeah, item J.
Flip the page too quickly. J is resolution amending the Peters Township Personnel Manual by creating a job description for the position of Assistant Parks and Recreation Director.
So within the 2019 operating budget is an appropriation for the position of Assistant Parks and Recreation Director. And, the focus of this job is going to be twofold. One, to provide some continuity in terms of the management of the department under the direction of the Parks and Rec Director. The other thing is this individual is going to serve as a person who develops programming for the department. The job description that's in your docket reflects that. And the first step in our hiring process is for council to approve the job description for the position prior to us soliciting applications. So,
Monica, did you look at this?
Yeah, in general, the job description does follow in line with what, and is subservient in the respect that it's a delegated responsibility under the director. I had a couple questions for Mr. Lauer because the language in the document I had for director was a little different. He assures me that there's not a big deviation and that they're looking at those. But I think that the job description captures the intent and it follows the same salary structure as the assistant planner as far as grade. Correct. So I think there's no issues with that. I'd like to move that we approve the job description for, Resolution 010219, amending the Peters Township manual, providing for the job description for an assistant recreation director.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay.
Could I add one thing? Could I add one thing about that? I would like, if possible, as we expand the staffing there, for them to consider potentially having someone more responsible there on the weekends. If anyone has ever been up there on a Saturday or a day when they're having the different sports events, there's a lot of people in and out of there. And I think it's a lot to ask of the people at the desk to manage that.
Yes, and you know, not to digress, but one of the things that you're going to hear from us is that when we were preparing the applications for the insurance companies are insistent that we have a youth protection policy. And one of the challenges, quite frankly, in the rec center is the people who actually man that desk actually fall into that category. And it may well be that we need to recruit people who are a bit older to supervise those activities.
Mature is the word.
To supervise those activities on weekends as opposed to having high school students do that. So we're coming back to you with that at a later date.
Thank you.
Okay, we had a motion and a second. Again, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next is departure from regulation to create a residential lot with direct driveway access to a collector road.
So this is the first of 3 items on the agenda that relate to a plan that's being proposed for a subdivision that's being proposed on Bower Hill Road. I don't know if you want to go through this, Ed? Or?
Do you want to? Sure. So you broke it up into 3 steps. The first step is council granting the requested modification. In our subdivision ordinance, you're not allowed to create lots with direct driveway access onto the collector road. Bower Hill is a collector road in this case. So the first step is the modification. This, as you can see on the map, this is a stretch, the lower end of Bower Hill Road. This is a stretch that is fairly straight away, and we had our township traffic engineer go out and look at it. They exceed the minimum site distances getting out of this new driveway. So for that reason, Planning Commission recommended that the modification be approved as part of this subdivision. So that's step 1, is the modification to allow this new lot 2, to be carved off of here and have direct access to Bower Hill Road.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is that if council needs to take action on that modification, that they will move ahead with the subdivision. The one thing I would also suggest is that if in fact this departure is granted, that it be done conditionally, that there be no further subdivisions of these properties.
When you say modification, you mean just for this specific subdivision? I mean, we're not modifying the rule that says you can't.
Actually, what it is, it's a departure from regulation that's specific to this.
All right.
Essential.
So there was a home there before already, right?
Right. It was.
That was the one that burned down, right?
Correct.
Does it sit behind that?
Well, I'll move that we permit a departure from our Township regulation restricting the creation of lots with direct driveway access to a collector road for Champion Capital subdivision. However, a condition on this approval would be that no further subdivision of these parcels would be allowed, and that would be noted on the subdivision drawing.
Second.
The motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next is approval for recording purposes of the Champion Capital Final Subdivision Plan as shown on drawings prepared by Whitmer Engineering dated June 2018 for Champion Capital.
Well, Champion Capital has recently purchased this property. It's 2.3 plus acres. They're proposing to split it into 2 lots. Lot 1 would be 1.082 acres, and Lot 2 is 1.210 acres. This is a section of Peters that is zoned low-density residential. Minimum lot size in this area is a half an acre. Both of these proposed lots exceed that minimum. Planning Commission did review this at their July 12 meeting and recommended council approve the subdivision plan.
Would we not have to have this amended to reflect what Mr. Berquist put on the prior motion, that these can no longer be subdivided, et cetera?
I mean, that's already in the motion, so that was already in your decision for the motion.
Yeah, but would it have to be noted on the plan? I think that's what
Yes, that's what you just, you can add that as a.
You can add that condition again, but it's before it gets released for recording, that note will be on that plan.
All right, well, just to clarify the record, I'll make a motion that we approve the final subdivision for the Champion Capital as shown on drawings prepared by Whitmer Engineering dated June 2018, adding the condition that a note be placed on the plan indicating that neither of the 2 lots can be further subdivided. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer.
And so the final action that you need to do is to amend the Peters Township Act 537 sewage facility plan so as to provide access to sewage services for this plan. As you can see in my report, this has been reviewed by all the relevant agencies, and it's my recommendation that council approve it. It would be resolution 010319.
I'll make a motion that we approve resolution 010319.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer.
Is anyone from Champion here?
That's right here.
No, I'm just, I know Andrew well, so I'm just busting him a little bit. You're getting away very easy on it.
You won tonight, so just stay in the back of the room.
Not one question you had to answer.
Next item is authorize the appropriate township officials to execute a storm sewer maintenance agreement with the Waters Group as well as sign and submit a PennDOT highway occupancy permit application.
So as we have seen before, PennDOT's regulations now require that any connection onto their storm sewer system requires a highway occupancy permit, which has to come from the township and not the developer. So the Waters Group, with the proposed development on Valley Brook Road, is connected into the storm sewer system of PennDOT, and that's occurring at this location. So therefore, we are required to submit the highway occupancy permit. So one of the things we need is authorization on behalf of the township to do that. The second thing is the township has no desire to maintain private storm sewers, and so the second agreement is with the Waters Group to clearly delineate that the responsibility for the maintenance of their storm sewers remains with the Waters Group. So this is very similar to the process we did at Primrose when they connected into the storm sewers, the PennDOT storm sewers.
We authorize the appropriate township officials to execute the stormwater maintenance agreement with Waters Group and a storm sewer maintenance agreement with the appropriate officials authorized to sign and submit a PennDOT highway occupancy permit.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Is this a joint application?
That was my.
I was going to say, I don't think it can be a joint application because the PennDOT will only accept this application from the municipality.
Crazy rule.
It says where did I see it at? I thought I saw it in there someplace, but maybe I'm losing my mind. But I thought there's something on here said, the attached co-applicant agreement for a highway occupancy permit for enclosed surface stormwater facilities has been reviewed by Waters and our solicitor.
I could defer to Mark.
Yeah, the practical matter is, what happens is we sign a form authorizing Waters engineer to submit an HOP on our behalf. That might be in the doc, and I don't know, I don't have it in front of me, but that form's really independent of the agreement. So you have an agreement with Waters that says, hey, you own the storm sewer system, you maintain it. Essentially, all we're doing is applying for the HOP, and there's a separate agreement. So whether it says co-applicant agreement or applicant agreement, I really don't think I don't think it makes a difference.
So despite the fact that they don't cross-reference that Stoll Schaefer represents Waters.
The two are independent, yeah, the two are independent, two pieces of paper in your
But we
document.
can still hold Waters responsible.
Yes.
Because that was my concern.
The whole purpose of the agreement, yeah.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
511, Mr. Lauer.
I'm always consistent.
You're consistent is right. I thought you'd go yes on this one.
Nope.
Next is
I was tempted to be there with you, but
Next item on the agenda is motion to authorize the appropriate township officials to execute a sanitary sewer holding tank agreement.
Yes, this is located at 888 McClellan Road. Mr. Surdy has purchased this property, would like to build a home here. He had proposed extending the existing sanitary sewers from somewhere in this location out to his property. The Peters Creek Sanitary Authority has a plan for the future. These homes that are located in here are not sewered. And so their intention is within the next 2 years to extend the sewer down here, at which time they would connect this home in. Mr. Surdy would like to proceed with the construction of his home and is proposing installing a holding tank. In the meantime, Peters Creek Sanitary Authority doesn't have a problem with that, and for him to be able to do that, he needs to enter into an agreement with the township, and that agreement needs to be presented to the Washington County Sewerage Council. So the one thing that I will point out, Mrs. Merrill noted, was that the original agreement did not address the transfer of the property or any assignments. We've modified that agreement so that in fact is included.
With the agreement modified then, indicating that it would carry through if the property transferred, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize the manager to execute a holding tank agreement for 888 McClellan Road, pending the posting of a $1,000 cash bond for the Surdys.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Just, it's not going to be a septic system, it's just going to be a holding
tank.
So it'll be removed at some point when the sewer comes
Yes.
through. I don't want that job.
well, and the point that I guess I'd be concerned about, that this does not set any precedent that this becomes an acceptable option. It is unique to this condition.
I think it's unique to this site because you in fact have sanitary sewers coming in. It's actually the sanitary authority who's preferring that it be done this way as opposed to connecting onto their system at some other location. They want to be able to pick up the remainder of those homes.
Well, that would be the point that would allow me to vote yes. I certainly wouldn't want to see this proliferated through the township.
I agree with that. I think it's just unfortunate that Peters Creek is not planning to bring in the sewers for several years. So why hold up these people's lives moving forward?
I agree.
And we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item is ordinance amending the Peters Township Code of Ordinances, Chapter 315, regarding property maintenance.
The proposed ordinance, the change is twofold. It does not change the substantive nature of the ordinance. It only addresses who may enforce the ordinance. I have a concern that when we get into, and it only occurs on rare occasions, but when we get into critical incidents where there is a known possibility of violence, that we provide the opportunity that the code enforcement be done by a police officer as opposed to the individual who does code enforcement in town.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
But to that end, I'm sorry, Lynn.
No, I did ask Mr. Lauer a question in advance of this, because it's kind of an open-ended statement to designate township employees. And I understand and I agree 100% with the goal, but I didn't know if he should qualify what the point of that special appointment would be. And that was the enforcement, not to serve in the role of a code officer.
Well, no, but it actually is to be a code enforcement officer. What it would be is we're going to work with one of the patrol officers and appoint them to be a code enforcement officer, but only use them in rare occasions where that makes sense. We don't want our police department to be code enforcement officers. We want to do that here, but we have occasion where we have situations where I'm not comfortable having a civilian doing that kind of enforcement.
So this will be on a case-by-case determination with the facts that are proposed. There still could be circumstances where we would send a code enforcement officer and he could run into an issue because we weren't prepared for that possibility.
And the nature of code enforcement is that you're telling people no, and no is not something most people want to hear. Yeah. So,
Are you planning to do this on a case-by-case basis, so it might be a different police officer for each circumstance?
What we're going to try to do is to find an officer who has an interest in this area and assisting us and train them. And that person would stay designated as the code enforcement officer inside the police department.
Okay.
Would they get paid extra?
They get paid as a police officer, and that's
which is extra.
which is fair compensation.
Which is more than a code officer.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item on the agenda is payroll and bills.
Mr. Chairman, I reviewed the payroll and bills. I find them in order and move that they be paid.
I'll second. Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. 7-0, Mr. Lauer. Next item is correspondence. Mr. Lauer, either of these items under correspondence, things we need to address?
Yes.
That's pretty standard.
Yes. This letter from the Peters Creek Sanitary Authority is unsettling. Apparently, the Clarendon Municipal Authority has, for an extended period of time, overcharged the upstream communities, and the estimate from the CPA representing the Peters Creek Sanitary Authority is that overcharge is as much as $608,000. I really think, given the nature of
I don't think it was an intentional overcharge. I think it was the way they were calculating it.
That may well be.
Yeah.
But what also
I don't want it to look like
but what concerns me is how this occurs over this length of time, and it's only now being addressed and rectified.
Because I think the Peters Creek Sanitary Authority is probably the only authority that ever had their own CPA do an audit of the numbers, or they had access to those numbers.
I don't know.
Well, and that's why, excuse me, but I take exception to the fact that I don't think that this has not been a matter that the Peters Creek Sanitary has been concerned about. They've been after CMA for a while to try to understand, and just did the audit. And I agree with Mr. curious, this is probably one of the only times they've sent their own auditor in there.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not suggesting that the problem is with the Peters Creek Sanitary Authority, the Clerk Municipal Authority, but it is a problem that, for whatever reason, this goes undetected for as long as it has. And it's good that, in fact, the Peters Creek Sanitary Authority is attempting not only get this resolved for their benefit, but other upstream communities. It's up to council whether you think there may be value in having our representatives come to one of our future meetings and explain what's happening so that we have a better understanding of that.
I would be in favor of that.
I think that they'd be willing to come. The time when Gary and I met with them, just to kind of get a handle on what was going on a few months ago, was well received. They were very happy about talking to us, and I think they'd like to have more frequent opportunity to kind of fill us in on what's going on there. That's an area that is going to continue to develop, and there are going to be a lot of residents. There's a lot of residents now, and there'll be even more who are using that sanitary authority. So I think we need to get a handle on what's going on. Could we plan that either at a council or a workshop? Or I don't know what our...
There may be need for a workshop in the near future. Let me see whether or not we can incorporate that into that.
I'd like to know whether they can go back further than 2013.
Well, I think the other thing they raised that's kind of interesting is can you have an offset in any one year if in fact there's not a surplus but rather a deficit? Mm-hmm. And from what I can tell, you can't. I think they may be right. So
time will tell on that. Okay, the next item is reports. Is there any member of council wishes to discuss any of the reports? Next item is miscellaneous. Glass recycling.
There are two items in the docket. Michael Brothers is for the communities, the South Hills communities, is sponsoring a twice a week glass recycling that people can take advantage of. We've attempted to advertise that on our website. The other thing is, and this was actually an article that Mr. Steigel had provided me. I think this is the best synopsis I have read of what is occurring with regard to recycling. And if you really want to understand what the challenge is, this article lays it out pretty good.
So do you know what the plan is? Michael's going to do this for a short term, and then will they make a determination on to expand it to other communities?
Well, there's that, and apparently initially the response has not been what they would hope it would be. The other thing is Shaycog is looking at the possibility of creating drop-off centers itself, and I don't think there's a market for this, or doing curb collection of just glass under a separate contract. But quite honestly, what they're talking about is a number that is higher than what people are paying to recycle all other materials at this point. So I can't imagine that people have an interest in that. So.
Well, I don't know whether people would. I know that there are a lot of people that have told me that they're very disappointed about not having an outlet for where they could send their glass out. Now, I don't know if this drop-off is free, if that would be something that would be amenable to. Maybe people are just waiting. It's not been used a lot because so many people were thrown it in the trash.
Yeah.
If people had known that before the holiday, I'm sure they would have been inundated with all the New Year's Eve bottles. But,
Gary, that was a really good description, analysis of why this has happened.
Yes.
Well,
blame it on the Chinese.
Yeah. Well, we need to commend Mrs. Merrill, too, because I know she has spent a lot of her time trying to find an alternative here, and I think probably all of us on council have gotten angry emails from residents. I know I had a half-hour dissertation with a resident this past weekend discussing why they can no longer put their glass in the recycling bin. So
I don't know. I think there's opportunity there. It's a unique, there's a lot of moving parts with it. There is definitely a market for glass, but as that article pointed out, it has to be clean. It has to be separated from everything else, and that's where the single stream recycling really has failed in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges is, and it relates to single stream recycling, people like it because it's easy, but you still have to take the effort to make the product marketable. So you can't be throwing in things that can't be recycled because it increases the cost of processing the materials that are there. And there has to be some effort that they be clean enough that in fact you can do that. So.
You know, Mr. Commissioner Schober's in the audience. Maybe he could think of some way the county could help us out here with creating some jobs.
There is a glass plant, isn't there, in Washington or near the city someplace? I thought I read that somewhere.
Oh, it's not recyclable unless it's recyclable.
Yes,
it's not there.
Because of the contamination, the market's not there, so you're going to have a hard time finding someone who wants to do it.
Yeah.
In charge of the township has a contract still in effect, so they're okay for a little while. It will be going away also. So.
And the problem you have is you really can't stockpile it waiting for the market to come back. You know, where are you going to put it? You know, let's build a building in the park just to store glass for 25 years for it to come back. The other thing I wanted to point out was the email that Mrs. Merrill sent today with regard to the Airbnbs and how some municipalities in Westmoreland are trying to get these third-party rental sites to collect the occupancy taxes. So, which I think is a grand idea. I mean, I'm sure we don't have too many Airbnbs here in Peters Township, but I did attend a seminar in Philadelphia back in December where this was discussed, how a lot of municipalities are trying to find a way to take advantage of the fact that residents are renting out their homes for short-term rentals. So I don't know if we have any here in Peters Township, but it may be something to look at.
Well, actually, you know, that's changed from last year, because last year when I checked, there were no Airbnbs in Peters Township. There are now.
Really?
Yeah, there's a couple.
Not many throughout the county. We've been talking about trying to figure out what we could do with it. There's not a lot of them that we've come up with, and Paul told me a little while ago that the two in Peters, which again, looking on the information, it's hard to find anything. So you have to get them registered and everything else. But we'll look into it, Monica, to follow up on your message.
Thank you. Something I'd like to ask. I received an email from a resident who was disappointed in what she perceives as poor road maintenance, and had said to me that apparently Facebook, there's a lot of complaints about road maintenance. Have we had people calling the township? Has anyone else?
I've had a few. We had the one snow event where it turned icy really quickly.
Yeah, that Wednesday night.
Yes, and I can tell you, and I'm going to verify this. What I've been told is that the road department was called out late, and the reason they were is our community's like every other community. It's the officers who are out on the road who make that call as to when conditions get bad. They were involved in the middle of an arrest, and their attention was focused on that and not the roadway system. So on that particular day, they came out late. I know she also made reference to Sunday, but I was here on Sunday while that squall was going on, and quite frankly, I was quite impressed with how well they did. They actually salted the entire community in less than 2 hours, and so that's well within, you know, the 3-hour goal for salting. So.
Well, and the problem with Sunday was that the storm came so quickly. I mean,
Yes.
it came literally out of nowhere, like between 8:30 and by 9:30, everything had about an inch and a half of snow on
And
it.
it's really when people need to travel.
Yes.
You know, I tried to, and she understood that there is a protocol for which roads get treated.
Yeah, so actually, to Mr. Herson's credit on Sunday, he knew that this was predicted. He actually was here at 6:30 in the morning himself, waiting for the roads to get bad to call out the guys. And so, you know, you're not going to get a quicker response than what you had on that day because of him being present. So,
One question I have to ask Paul, what about Thomas Road? Anything happening? I mean, it's driving that road now is like a sport, you know what I mean? You're trying to see if you can stay in your lane.
yeah, it's beyond, you know, we were just talking about that ourselves today, and we once again will be talking to PennDOT. It's no longer just a matter of the ice, it's the potholes, and in fact, we were kidding that when it freezes over, that's the only time that the potholes are filled in. It's filled with
Well,
ice.
we had the same problem last year too, didn't we?
Well, and I don't know whether we can do this as a practical matter because, you know, turning that road back over to PennDOT for winter maintenance will make it challenging, but My position with PennDOT is going to be that if you can't solve that drainage problem, we don't want to maintain that road. I fear that our inability to get the ice off that road may create some liability for the township, since we're charged with maintaining it for winter maintenance. And I don't think that's
And now we're
position we
going
want to be
into a
in.
couple of days of freezing cold weather, and that's Ed and I drove on it the other day. It was dangerous. It's dangerous. Like Mr. Kozer said, you got to be adept to drive that road.
Yeah, you can't even drive it at night. Driving it at night is just, cross your fingers and hope for the best. You hope you memorize where the potholes are during the course of the day so that you know to avoid them in the evening.
I have two other miscellaneous items. One, I just want to inform council, we met with West Bend Power. They are once again going to be doing clearing the trees under their transmission lines, including inside of Peterswood Park. They're committed to replacing what they remove with trees that are appropriate for being in their right-of-way, but that will mean that you're going to lose some larger trees and have them replaced with smaller trees.
They're not giving us any of those bug trees that we're going
I hope not.
Yeah, I don't want any of that.
The other thing, I'm pleased to announce that Mike McLaughlin has accepted the township's offer to become the future fire chief. So upon the retirement of Mr. Coyle, Deputy Chief McLaughlin will be taking over as the fire chief. So,
Anyone else have anything to add under miscellaneous?
I wondered if you could answer whether or not someone has to go to that Alcoasand meeting. We received some information back in December. There's something called a regeneralization transfer agreement. And I know that there's only a small part of the northern part of the township that might be related.
yeah, and where we have responsibility as a municipality because of the FY 37 plan, quite honestly, what we have done, because there's such a limited area, we have asked the Peters Township Sanitary Authority to represent our interest at those kind of meetings.
So someone will probably go into that. Okay, and then one last question about the other board openings, Wakefield Youth Commission. I know that they sent a request, so hopefully we'll find someone soon. We'll be interviewing with those.
Yes, in fact, Mr. Gromick has a list of candidates for the Planning Commission, and our intention is to do interviews at the next gathering.
And also construction appeals.
We have a couple applicants who are interested in that position as well.
Okay. And then cable's the other, so then we'll be set again.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anything that any member of council would like to see on the next agenda?
I would like, not necessarily the next agenda, but at some point in the next few meetings, the emergency preparedness plan. I mean, we're kind of in the midst of a bad time, and I wondered, I know we had reviewed that a while back, and I didn't know where the status of that was.
Well, let me just tell you that is very near completion. As an initial draft, it's going to be circulated amongst the affected departments as well as the school district and the ambulance service, and then based upon that, it's going to be submitted to council.
Okay, does anyone else have anything for the good of the order? All right, meeting adjourned.
I just have a really brief executive session item on